Coming up, we speak with an organization that has been a premier source of public media by and about Native Americans since 1976. We learn about Alaska history and heritage, and will Congress pass legislation on gun reform? I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amarawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. We begin in Alaska, where tribal leaders are gathering for a major conference. The National Congress of American Indians is hosting its mid-year gathering in Anchorage. This is the first time NCAI is holding an all-in-person conference since the start of COVID. Major topics include pandemic recovery and climate change. The meeting will also serve as a place to pass resolutions by the Congress's members. Already, the gathering has had a hiccup. The day before the conference started, news organization Indians.com reported that the organization's CEO, Dante Desiderio, had been suspended. The day after, NCAI said Desiderio was on temporary administrative leave. NCAI President Fawn Sharp said the organization was not in a position to share more information and wants others to respect his privacy. This year's event is titled Thinking Beyond Self-Determination and will last 4 days. In Connecticut, sports teams are getting new mascots that aren't native. West Hartford's Board of Education recently changed the mascots of 2 high schools. Representatives of the town's Corporation Council say the decision is in line with local, state, and federal policies concerning equity and diversity. The change comes despite a lawsuit filed in an attempt to keep the school's former native-themed mascot. Conard High School's athletic teams will now be known as the Red Wolves, and Hall High School is now the Titans. A new state law requires municipalities to receive written support from a state or federally recognized tribe in Connecticut. Any school whose athletic teams use native mascots or names risk losing state funding, and that funding is created with revenue from the state's 2 tribal casinos, the Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods Resort Casino. In Oregon, the state is paying college costs for tribal citizens attending schools within its borders. Enrolled citizens of the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon now qualify for a grant that will cover most or all higher education costs. The state legislature funded the Oregon Tribal Student Grant Program to the tune of $19 million for the 2022 academic year. Maximum grants will cover the average cost of attendance. That includes things like tuition, books, and housing. Around 700 tribal citizens are expected to take part in the program. The aim is to reduce financial barriers that contribute to low college attendance and completion rates among Native people. Backers of the program hope the lawmakers will extend it to 2023. Well, volcanic cones near a peak sacred to tribes are getting protections in New Mexico, along with ceremonial ties, wildlife, and plants provided sustenance for indigenous communities traveling to the area. The years-long effort received a major boost on June 2nd. It is located at present-day El Bar Ranch near Mount Taylor, west of Albuquerque. National conservation group Trust for Public Land announced that additional acreage is being set aside for wildlife, cultural preservation, and recreation. The total cost is $34 million. The goal is to increase green spaces, improve access to outdoor recreation, and reduce the risk of wildfires as the pressures of climate change mount. Acoma Governor Randall Vicente says he would like the tribal nation to conduct an ethnographic study to identify areas, locations, and cultural sites. An access plan is being created for areas important to the pueblos of Acoma, Laguna, and Zuni, as well as the Hopi and Navajo. Well, here's a pick me up. Every other June, Juneau, Alaska is filled with Native people of all ages for an event called Celebration. Part of this year's event included some cute faces. Take a look.
Been made by Alberta Alaska.
The event was part of the Toddler Regalia Review. These Alaska Native youth are bringing their cultures to life. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, Vision Maker Media's nearly $1.2 million in direct funding will support Native filmmakers. The executive director tells us more about the upcoming projects. Stay with us. Indian country today is now ICT. The ICT News team has more interviews to share from the Reservation Economic Summit held last month in Las Vegas. Shirley Snavy has this interview.
One of the best programs that the Reservation Economic Development Summit does is the 40 Under 40. So that means that 40 young leaders are honored for their accomplishments and what they do for their community. And I'm really proud and honored to meet Emily Edenshaw. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Emily is an Alaska Native, and she's the director, the CEO and president of the Alaska Native Heritage Center.
Yes.
And I love that place.
Yeah, it's a special place. We've been in operation since 1999, and so we've worked with millions of people. And I love my job. I love the work that we do all across Alaska and the lower 48. And I'm really proud to share that in 2020, we were named a cultural treasure by the Ford Foundation.
Well deserved. I've had the opportunity to work in Alaska for this job that I have as a journalist. And one of those exciting things is to get to visit places like that. And the other thing that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is the series that we did on the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act.
Yes.
Celebrated 50 years. And how has that influenced your life?
You know, for me, I'm a proud Chilista shareholder and Doyon shareholder. And I'm also a tribal citizen of the native village of Emonic. And so, whenever I talk to people, I often kind of preface it with, when we start talking about Alaska's unique structure, it always falls into it's complicated. It is. And so, for me, it's very personal. I've met so many Alaska Natives where it's our identity, it's our connection to our regional corporations and our village corporations. And I'm just so proud of the work that they do. They've helped me put me through college. They're helping my kids. And like I said, I'm just a very proud shareholder.
And how do you tell that story at the Alaska Native Heritage Center?
At the Heritage Center, what we often say is, people are wanting to reconnect to their home, wherever you come from, whether if you're living in Anchorage or you're living in the lower 48, people want to have that connection to culture. And Native corporations are one way that people reconnect. And so, yes, they're for-profit entities, but they have, very vast social responsibilities to our community. And so at the Heritage Center, we make it a point to partner with our Native corporations. We also make it a point to meet our community where they're at, whether they're youth, people who are coming out of incarceration, people living in the lower 48. And at the Heritage Center, we are very intentional in meeting them where they're at.
The Heritage Center has so many amazing programs. And I think one of the things that you do best is education. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
I think oftentimes we get distilled down to, you're just a cultural center. You're just here for tourists. When in reality, like you mentioned, we have so many different programs. As someone, and as I was sharing with you earlier, I'm someone that, I'm reconnecting to my roots, and I'm learning, I made my first parka. I'm 38 and I made my first parka. And, at the Heritage Center, we are doing work not only with youth, with elders, but with people, from all different walks of life. And so, again, I think we just often get distilled down to, oh, you're just a museum or you're just a cultural center. But we have programs, and we are, we're a leader in cultural tourism in Alaska. And that's something that is, and what I've often said is cultural tourism is one of my love languages. I love it. Tourism is education, education is tourism. And it's a way that people can, non-Native people can learn about our cultures, but it's also a way for our community, the Alaska Native community, to perpetuate our ways of life, our knowledge, and share it with the world.
And certainly that's one thing that I think Alaskans do more than anybody else, just because of the vastness of the state and the fact that milk is so expensive. I know that's one of the things that you always hear. Gas is pretty high right now too.
Yeah.
But that subsistence way of life is still so important in Alaska.
When you look at Alaska, I think historically it's been presented in a very geographical lens. Come visit the mountains and the brown bears and the northern lights. And, as a Native woman, I remember just looking at the marketing and just really asking myself, where are the Indigenous people? Where are our stories being told? And rather than continuing to admire the problem, I made it a point to run for the board. And like I shared earlier, we are reshaping the tourism industry in Alaska right now. It's a very exciting time. And, like I said, there's been this historical reality and this experience where we've been erased, and there's no excuse for it. And so it's us saying, we're here, we want to partner. And like I said, it's a very exciting time to be living in Alaska right now.
And kind of a scary time too with climate change.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at, there are conversations happening right now where, villages are, having these really critical conversations of having to relocate. And when we look at, our languages come from the land. And so just knowing that there is outmigration that's occurring in addition to climate change. And, for me, it's really, interesting to see, when we start talking about these issues, we need to make sure Alaska Natives have a seat at the table. And if we aren't at the table, we need to create our own table.
Good deal. I gotta ask you about your jewelry.
Oh, yes. So this is by a Yupik artist, Piyuk, and sealskin and beads, and I love her work. Her auntie is one of my chairs on my PhD committee, and so I love her work. Yeah.
Congratulations on being named a leader in the 40 under 40 through the National Center. You so deserve it, and I am so proud of you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor, and I just want to say, to all of the, other awardees, it really is an honor to receive this award. And, I think in a lot of aspects, my work is just beginning. And, if there's one thing that I would say is that, the message and what this award represents for me is that, no matter where you come from, whatever your experience has been, you can contribute to your community. And it's just such an honor to be here and to receive this award. And I was sharing earlier, growing up when I met, people who were close to getting 40, I thought, wow, they're old. And now that I'm almost 40, I'm like, okay, we're not old. So
thank you, Emily.
But thank you so much.
This year, Vision Maker Media has funded $1 million to 11 documentaries through its Public Media Fund. It has also funded $180,000 through its Creative Shorts Fellowship. Through these projects, the organization is providing support to filmmakers from 19 Native nations. Joining us today is Vision Maker Media's Executive Director, Francine Blythe-Lewis. Welcome back to the ICT Newscast, Francine.
Thank you very much. My great pleasure, always.
At a high level, tell us about some of the documentaries that you're funding.
Well, we are looking at really topics that resonate very well within communities and Native people and what we're facing. Some of them are historical trauma stories of decolonization and colonization impacts of within our communities from that. So, water rights, missing murder, Indigenous women issues, and health, working with recovering from traumas in our own personal lives, within our own families, due to relocation, things like that. And then also focusing on some of the stories, particularly through our creative shorts that are either narrative or documentaries, and they just talk about personal journeys and exploration, like in traditional storytelling, mythology in a sense, and also on traditional societies that are still existing from the time immemorial in a sense. And also someone is doing a kind of a horror or a thriller film in our creative shorts.
Oh, that is so exciting. I'm personally scared of horror movies, but I would watch it to support the filmmakers, of course. I actually want to learn more about the filmmakers. As I mentioned, they come from 19 different tribal nations. Tell us about who you're working with.
Oh, gosh. We're working with Natalie Benali from Navajo Nation. She's one of our new filmmakers. Actually, a lot of these filmmakers are new, and we're always trying to reach new talent throughout Indian country year after year when we do support. Some are returning filmmakers that have made films in the past, but maybe not particularly with Vision Maker Media funding support. So just Charles Kennedy from Oklahoma, he's Kiowa. We are supporting again Leah Hale with the film, and we supported her with Bring Her Home, which was a really big success, and it was about murdered, missing Indigenous women. We're also supporting let's see. So we do support, our films are not specifically always just for Native talent. We also do support stories of Native films and stories that are produced by non-Native, but the majority of their cast and crew, whether it's above the line or below the line in cinematography or line production or something like that, has to be a Native crew. So we're supporting somebody, Jeff Bieber, who's doing Red Power Rising, the rising of the movement of Native sovereignty that started way back in the 70s, but it's focusing on one of the, not the famous leaders, but one of kind of the behind the scenes leaders that started this awareness. We're also working with Ramona Emerson, who we've worked with before. She's always a great filmmaker. So those are just some.
What kinds of resources can these filmmakers use this funding for?
They can use, under the Public Media Fund, they can use funding for research and development up to $25,000, for production shoot up to $150,000, or for post-production work up to $20,000. And when they submit their applications, they're letting us know what phase they're submitting for, and then they make their request based on that limit.
And when exactly can we expect some of these projects to be completed?
In general, we try to have the contract films done within 2 years. Then they go to public television broadcasting with the creative shorts, because they're shorter films, and usually they've already done their R&D and such, and we fund them for production at $25,000. We try to get those ones, the creative shorts, done within a year, and the public media one has up to 2 years, sometimes a little bit longer.
Vision Maker Media has been around for 46 years. I'm really curious, how do you think that it has evolved from when it first started versus where we're at now?
Well, one thing has remained consistent, I think, with Vision Maker Media when it first started in 1976 was that, if people aren't aware or do know, my father founded the organization. And one of the things that he wanted to do, just like the National Museum of the American Indian, was bring contemporary story, Native talent, and Native topics and issues to the fore of public awareness. And so we are still doing that same thing today. We do reflect some on history, but we really want to be bringing contemporary stories, contemporary topical Native issues to educate audiences about Indian country and what is going on within our families, ourselves, and our communities over the history of encounter.
And those stories are so important. Francine, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Indian country today is now ICT. In a rare move, U.S. senators from different parties seem to be working together on gun reform. The talks from lawmakers include red flag laws, funding for mental health resources, and expanded background checks. ICT regular contributor John Tasuda joins us to weigh in on this proposal. Hi, John.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's wonderful to have you back. I want to just jump right in here. We're seeing U.S. senators from both parties talking to one another about an issue that is so important. Tell us what stands out to you at this point.
Well, I think what really stands out is that this may be one of those moments in time where several currents have come together, and it may be possible to actually get some meaningful legislation done on guns. We have the recent events, and they've really shocked a lot of people, even those who are strong gun advocates. We have, it seems like a group of senators, some of whom are retiring and are willing to go further out than they would be, and others who are not up for election yet and see this as something that they could support now and then have some time over the next few years to explain their vote and thus defend it next time they're up for election. So having a group of senators, at least 10 on the Republican side, I think convinces those on the Democrat side to have their more progressive colleagues, who obviously would like this to go a lot further, but telling them that this is the time, if we're ever going to get something done, to come together. And so it looks like this may be the time that happens.
From the Republican side of these negotiations, there has been a number of wants from the Democratic Party in terms of what they say, we'll sit down and talk to you. From the Republican side, sort of tell us where those negotiations lie in terms of what actually gun reform could look like.
Well, I think, one element that Republicans have repeatedly put on the table is the mental health side of this. And, now that can have a lot of different meanings for different people. But at its base, taking more seriously those who have mental conditions and making sure that they don't have access to anything, but particularly weapons that could hurt themselves or worse, hurt other people. And so that's been something that's really been pushed for by Republicans for quite a while. I know there's a lot of Democrats that support it. They just want it to go further down the road. Again, I think this may be the time that everybody's willing to accept what they can get done for now.
And the part that the Republicans are also saying that they will not support in this negotiation is a ban on assault rifles. Tell us about that.
Right. Well, so for many Republicans sort of across the spectrum, and even some who might be willing to support some restrictions, they see this really as an attempt to restrict gun ownership rights in general. And so, they're really hesitant to start down that road. And again, I think, they perceive this as a time that there are other things that they can get done that could have a meaningful impact without having to start down that path. And, once this is in place, then who knows what future years may bring. There may be, further action, further negotiations that could happen. But you got to get one win in place first.
Right. The other part of the negotiation has been red flag laws. I feel like we've heard that so often in the media. One, tell us what red flag laws mean. And two, tell us, how we could potentially see that play out in Indian country and tribal nations specifically.
Sure. So, red flag laws sound simple, but it actually, they're passed by states, and they have a lot of variety from state to state. The general theme is to say we want to remove guns from the hands of those who we would deem unsafe. Now who is unsafe? That obviously has a lot of variation, and again, from state to state, there's a lot of differences. But certainly within that, sort of broad category, people accept those who have repeatedly committed domestic violence. Obviously, those who have severe mental health conditions, who can be a danger to others as well as themselves. So, I think that at this point, it sounds to me like from the federal level, they're willing to still let the states determine who would ultimately be deemed unsafe under the red flag laws. But what the state deems then would have federal support for both enforcement, and they're talking about putting some money to assist the states with this as well.
And talking about how red flag laws could play out in tribes, what do you see there?
Well, it's interesting because, the tribes are under federal law. And so it would, probably take both a combination, sort of as we saw with domestic violence, a combination of tribal law to put it sort of on the book as policy on the reservation, legal policy, and then have the federal government back that up. Now, whether that would take some additional federal law to sort of fully implement it, but certainly, the federal law enforcement could work alongside tribal governments to try to create, safer conditions on reservations as well.
We only have a short time left here, John, but what we're seeing right now is U.S. senators from both parties saying we need to pass legislation on gun reform. And I'm really curious, if this does play out and this is a success, I think that would mean a lot to a lot of people. But what happens if nothing happens on gun reform?
Well, that's always a distinct possibility, despite, the fact that people have said we've made great progress, and there's the outlines of a deal to be had. The devil's in the details, as always. So certainly it could fail, and it would be dissatisfactory to a lot of people. The recent crimes have really shocked the consciousness of the nation. So I think that would, if it fails now, it's possible that in 2 years during presidential campaigning, that it could become an issue then, and really could shake up the debate 2 years from now. That's one of the reasons I think there's also some incentive for both parties to come together and at least have accomplished something together on this, so that they're not starting from ground zero 2 years from now during a presidential campaign.
Sure. Well, John, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.